Welcome back to That's How They Roll 10 and a few spare striking facts about the history of women's bowling. I'm Roxanne Farwick Owens from DePaul University. So we left off on the, the women from the Women's International Bowling Congress had just presented their bomber to the military. And now they decided that for their next endeavor, they should, a better match for their mission would be to fund vehicles for healing rather than for destruction. So their new campaign was Wings of Mercy, give your dollars wings that fly, we shall scale new heights. They planned to purchase a ground ambulance and a medical evacuation plane. So they continue to do all of their different types of novelty tournaments, hit the dictator pins, and bowling ball dances, and all of their raffles, raffles, and all of those kinds of uh, tournaments. But they also added in a lot of different celebrity appearances and corporate sponsorships and things to continue to make money. So one of the ones that I read about in the Women's Bowling Journal was Pabst Blue Ribbon had hired Groucho Marx to come to one of the tournaments, and he presented a goat to the winners of one of the tournaments. No idea why he presented a goat, but the winners of that particular tournament, the girls were presented a live goat, which they immediately named Papsty. So, and it was in Milwaukee that they won. So very quickly, the ground ambulance goal was reached, and it was donated in 1943 at the Hendricks Field in Syracuse, New York. And very quickly after that, the goal to buy the Douglas C-47 air evacuation plane, which was capable of conducting glider pickups, was reached. This was very important to have a plane like this because especially in places like China and Burma, India, theater, where the roads were almost impassable, they really needed to have that kind of a plane because the ground ambulances just couldn't get to the wounded there. So there was a very big celebration at LaGuardia Airfield where the plane was presented to the military officers in April of 1944. Baton twirlers, tap dancers, a very big celebratory atmosphere was held. Within months, the plane had made 50 successful missions to evacuate the wounded, and it had delivered 14,000 pounds of medical supplies. So here's a picture of the dedication ceremony. In 1945, the plane cost $80,000, which would be about $2 million in today's dollars. It was dedicated to flight nurse Ruth Gardner. Ruth Gardner was a flight nurse who died. She was the first flight nurse to die in service during the war. The plane was commissioned at Clover Field in Santa Monica, California, and within hours, the plane had delivered 5,000 pounds of medical supplies to Burma and had brought back hundreds of wounded soldiers. Another human interest story I found in the Women's Bowlers Journal, this Captain Harley Lovelace was a pilot of the Nightingale II, and he was interviewed over the radio when he had been presented with an award, and he noted that he had recently found out that his mom and his sister, I believe, were women who had done fundraising for the plane, and he was thrilled that it was such a honey of a plane, he said. So Miss Nightingale 3 was very quickly also purchased, and Miss Nightingale 3 was presented in 1945 at the Detroit Municipal Airport with great fanfare. And it was dedicated in honor of WIBC member and flight nurse First Lieutenant Alida Lutz. Alida Lutz had 727 flying hours and 197 missions to her credit, the highest of any flight nurse at the time. She had evacuated at least 3,500 wounded soldiers. She was a WIBC Gold Star member, which meant that she was a military member and also had a good bowling average. She died when a plane she was on crashed into a mountainside during a storm while evacuating soldiers from southern France. So the Wings of Mercy accomplishments At the ceremony, WIBC President Neprath presented the dedication plaque that would be placed in the cockpit to Colonel Juanita Redmond, who was the Chief of Nurses of the Army Air Corps. Major General Grant explained that the 9th Troop Carrier Command, along with Miss Nightingale the 1st and 2nd, had evacuated over 1 million wounded soldiers between Pearl Harbor and VE Day, and over 300,000 wounded soldiers between D-Day and VE Day. So that's an amazing accomplishment. These women raised that money through all of their nickel and dime tournaments and their bowling ball dances and their pass the hat. Women across the United States did this. So their accomplishment of raising $351,543,000, almost over $5 million in today's money, for the purchase of one Havoc A-20 bomber, a mobile field ambulance, and 3 Douglas C-47 air evacuation Mercy planes, was lauded by military agencies as an unparalleled success. So this is a picture of one of their conventions, one of the tournaments in 1941, which was held in Los Angeles. They suspended their tournaments during the 42 and 43 because of the war. In the Bowling Journal, they did every month publish the names of the women in the service. And they also raised money to send bowling equipment overseas and to the local barracks, because they knew what great recreation, mentally and physically, bowling was. So here's a picture of the bowl of wax and waves bowling. As the war came to a close, they did continue to raise funds. They had a new campaign, Sunny Hours to G.I. Jane and G.I. Joe. So after the war, women turned their attention to assisting the war wounded by collaborating with the Bowlers Victory Legion. As bowling was seen as good physical and mental rehabilitation tools, the WIBC began to fundraise to provide adaptive bowling equipment for returning veterans. The collaboration between the Women's Bowling Association and the BVL raised $60 million by 2012. I did want to also point out, this is definitely much more known, the contributions of women to the military, but it's worth, I wanted to mention this anyway. Many of the women in the military were also bowlers, as I said, but they were in the service. So there were 350,000 women who served in the military and in support roles during the war, both on the home front and overseas. If the women were also members of the WIBC, as I showed in that earlier picture, their names were published in the Woman Bowler magazine. There were 150 women in the Army Corps, the WACs they were known as, and some of them had non-combat roles, such as switchboard operators, cryptographers, mechanics, supply clerks. Then there were the WAVES, who had many different kinds of jobs, including clerical desk jobs, training pilots to calculate bomb trajectories. The Navy actively recruited educated women with science and math backgrounds, for instance. Over 1,000 women Air Force service pilots flew more than 60 million miles. Just so many fascinating things that women did. One thing that people might not know as much about are the spars, who worked as ship's cooks, radio operators, parachute riggers, and the highly secretive Loran monitors. And those were the women who monitored the radio signals every 2 minutes from 2 stations to calculate exact positions of ships and planes. So many of these women were also bowlers. So kind of just interesting. So women were asked for an article in the Women Bowler 1940s. Why do you bowl? One woman said, I'm not a daring person. I'm the type of person that can stand in line for something buy it, go back in line again, and the clerk would not recognize me. All my life I was John's sister, Anne's daughter, or Harry's wife. The only time anybody recognizes me for my own self is when I'm bowling. I can be my own self then. It is such a thrill to bowl a good game or convert a split. You can say I did it. It is the perfect sport for the mild and meek-mannered to let off a little steam. And I think this was maybe more the typical view of women in the early mid 20th century, that kind of more meek, mild. Well, clearly, these women were not meek and mild-mannered. They were the women who rolled to victory in all of their endeavors. These were the key WIBC officers through the years. And I've got some they're pictured, some of the names here. I didn't have pictures of them, but I wanted to mention them anyway. These were women who got things done. They contributed from the 1907 all the way up through the end of the 20th century. So membership in the WIBC continued to rise until it peaked in the 1970s with 4 million members. Similar to men's bowling, it began a steady decline. Variety of reasons for that. But very optimistic. The WIBC merged with the USBC in 2005. Bowling proprietors report increases in revenue, league participation, and diverse representation. There are multiple college scholarships available for bowling. Especially post-pandemic, people seem to be particularly interested in activities that bring them together in low-stakes, fun ways. The presence of bowling on multiple media formats has increased. Bowling's on TV again. Bowling for dollars. Just as it did a century ago, it brings people together in community for camaraderie, exercise, and fun, and sometimes for a good cause. So now you know how women's history, bowling history, and World War II history come together, as well as about the important work of not only Rosie the Riveter, but also Bonnie the Bowler and all her dedicated friends' support of the war efforts on the home front. So I hope you figured out that there were at least 10 facts in there and a few spare facts as well. But wait, there's a lot more. You definitely should go to the International Bowling Hall of Fame website. They have a great website with all kinds of other interesting information. I won't say it here, but I had a really weird, ghostly experience at the archives having to do with my grandpa. If you have never looked up Andy Varapapa, he's a trick bowler and his videos are hysterical. The story of African Americans and bowling is fascinating. There's a National Women's Bowling Writers Association that has a wonderful story as well. There are so many other bowling stories that we could go into that I would love to talk to you more about. So if you have any questions, my email is rowens@depaul.edu. Thank you so much for listening. I've enjoyed presenting for you.